Eva, and I am here for yet another episode of The Charm of It, a podcast for knitters who share my fascination with the nitty-gritty details of our craft. If you're a new viewer, I'm so glad you found your way to my little corner of the internet, and if you're a returning viewer, then welcome back. That's Thistle behind me. I have heard that several of you have missed her joining me in the podcast, and it's very warm again today, so neither of us really wanted her to sit on my lap, especially since I have a heating pad going. But I thought that if I popped her on the bed and kind of scooched over, you could enjoy her, even if she's not in focus. So I don't know why she suddenly decided to act up like that, but it's pretty amusing. Aside from background terrier shenanigans, this episode will include finished objects, works in progress, and for segments I will be updating you on my little frog-along thing, reviewing a yarn, and doing a Schrodinger sweater segment. Hopefully I pronounced that right. I've been getting lessons from a Dutch friend. So, I guess we should do finished objects first. I had a lot more time to knit last weekend than I normally do, and so I finished the Wishmaker mitts, which I'm very excited about. Oh, there we go. Oh, they're so pretty. So these have been blocked too. And I love them. I'm so pleased with how they turned out. You can see that there's one end I haven't woven in yet, and that's because this is the first knit I knit, and I think I'm going to go back and do the ribbing on fewer stitches. I went ahead and decreased for the ribbing on this one. So I didn't weave in that last end so that it would be really easy to rip out, but I'm still counting it as a finished object because I even blocked them and wove in all the other ends, of which there were quite a few. So these are out of Knit Picks palette. In Rainforest Heatherway is the Heather is the background. Brass Heather is the yellow, and the off-white is Finley Heather, and the pattern is Wishmaker Mitts by Erica Huser, who has the most incredible mitts patterns. And yeah, yay! I'm really pleased with these. And I love the fabric that the Knit Picks palette yarn knit up into, and after blocking, it's really nice. I haven't been able to judge whether it will be itchy or not. I'm hoping it could be a sweater yarn for me, just because then I would have a heathered lightweight yarn option for colorwork sweaters. But they took several days to dry, and then the heat came back. So I have to wait and see until later whether these itch me in the cool weather, because all wool itches me when it's 82 degrees out, especially in September. This is outrageous. I think that's around 25, 26 Celsius for all my Celsius friends. Too hot for September when you live in the north. The next finished object, I only have one, but I knit 2 birthday gnomes. This is using the Never Not Gnoming pattern by Sarah of Imagine Landscapes. I recently hosted a knit along with her for her second gnome pattern, which is the really neat cabled one, but this is the original one, and I love this one as well. So I have 2 friends who are having birthdays this weekend, or birthday get-togethers, and I wanted to knit each of them a birthday gnome, and I've already given one to my friend Kristen. She's also the one who I knit the big cabled gnome for, so that's Brunhilde, and then the little one she has named Nut, with a silent G, of course. And I knit them as mirror images to each other, so the other one has this as the body, and then this blue as the hat, and I was unprepared for how adorable they would look when they were together, so I'm going to insert a finished object photo, and it was really hard to separate them. So I definitely want to knit myself a set of mismatched gnomes now, and maybe other people need mismatched gnomes in their lives. I would have just gone ahead and knit a couple extras. However, this yarn was sent to me. Inez from Portugal sent me a few mini skeins a while ago, and I'm pretty sure this is one of the Moomin colorways. I love how it knit up, but because I only had 9 grams of it, and I used 6 grams of it for knitting the 2 gnomes. So I don't have enough to knit 2 more gnomes out of it. The beautiful blue color is Eden Cottage yarn. They're BFL silk. I don't know what the name of the colorway is, but I will try to find the label and let you know. Oh. And then the cream is just Knit Picks palette. Now, I did make a bit of a mistake when I was knitting these. We can call it an unintentional modification. I misread the pattern, and so I did the body increases more quickly than you're supposed to. I only knit 2 rounds plain in between the increases, and so that gave me a shorter gnome, and because it's shorter it also looks chubbier, even though it's the same diameter, or the same circumference. So I think of them as hobbit gnomes, but I still think they're cute and they take less time to knit, so I might just go ahead and use that modification in the future. They stand up, they're gnomey, so yeah, I'm really pleased with that, and I can't wait to give this one to my other friend. So the final finished object is a much bigger one. And that is my Forget-Me-Not cardigan, which I started back in May, I believe. And it has gone into hibernation multiple times, but now I have finally gotten my acting gear and finished it. Oh, and now that I'm holding it up, I see that I missed one end while weaving in ends, but that's okay because I'm going to have to insert finished object photos later anyway, so that you can see what it looks like outside of the camera and go. So I will weave in that end before that. Okay. Oh my gosh, it's so warm. So this is a cotton sweater. It's an organic cotton yarn, Biosessia. It's fingering weight, and this is Meadow, which is one of my very favorite shades of blue. And I got this during a Black Friday sale from Webs, which is yarn.com. And it's actually been on closeout ever since, so it's only $5 a ball, and the balls are 50 grams each. So if you're interested in an affordable organic cotton yarn in fingering weight, I found so many organic cotton yarns come in worsted weight, which seems weird to me, but there are still some colors available, including this one. Okay, so the ruffle part is a little weird, but this is what you can see of it until I'm just going to insert photos, especially since I'm really warm. But as you can see, I knit full-length sleeves, and I can fold them back if I want, but I really like having those extra long sleeves. And all in all, this took just over 5 skeins of yarn. So I had bought 6, and I'm glad I did, because I used 13 grams from the 6th ball, but that includes the 7-gram swatch. So I designed this myself, and I really wanted it to have a vintage feel to it. I mean, that's true of almost everything I knit, but okay, you can't really. Yeah, I'm just going to insert photos. Okay. Here, I'll unbutton from the top so you can at least see a little of what it looks like the way I normally wear it, which is just buttoned at the waist. So by that I mean this color blue, especially in the cotton yarn. I swatched quite a few patterns, and the yarn really wanted to be a stockinette based stitch, so I settled on this eyelet pattern, which is the quatrefoil. I think that, yeah. Wow, I need to drink more coffee before I record. Anyway, the quatrefoil eyelet pattern, which I have linked on the project page. And between this blue color and kind of the delicate feminine look of the eyelets, this felt like a very 1950s combination to me, and so I decided to just go ahead and run with that, and that's why I've got quite a fitted high crew neck, and it's also, as you can see in the finished object photos, quite snug. So one of the main reasons why I did that, and now I have to take it off, is because it's not itchy, but it's still really warm. Okay. So one of the reasons why I knit it snugly is because I planned it before I realized that my body had changed a bit. So a little bit of it was unintentional, but I did go ahead and knit the button band wider than normal, so that helped a little bit. But the other reason why I knit it so snug is because I have not used 100% cotton yarn to knit before, and everything that I've heard implies that it is going to stretch. So I thought I should go ahead and start with it very fitted. And I wear fitted sweaters anyway, so for me, the only downside is I won't be able to layer this over short sleeves, but that's okay because it's a cotton sweater and I've got a lot of sleeveless dresses and blouses in my warmer weather wardrobe. And even my winter wardrobe, if I'm being honest. But, yeah, so I have 2 other sweater quantities of this yarn in my stash. One is for my mom in a salmon pink, and one is for me in a dark gray. And so this is kind of the test sweater. I'm going to wear it for a while and see how it wears and what it behaves like and that kind of thing before casting on for one of those other sweaters. As soon as I had decided on this eyelet pattern, which has a really strong diamond feel to it, I knew that I wanted to do a raglan sweater because I thought that the diagonal lines of the raglan would really echo the eyelets and look really nice. And you can see that I did that on the sleeve caps as well as on the body. And however, I didn't want to knit this the way most raglan sweaters are knit, where you join the sleeves to the body and you knit everything in one for the yoke. There were 2 reasons for that. First, it's heavy on my forearms when I'm knitting a sweater that way. That's how I had to knit my swan sweater, and I just finished that when I started planning this, and I didn't really want to go through that again. And secondly, because it's cotton, I thought it would benefit from as many seams as possible. So I actually knit everything separately and then just went ahead and seamed up that raglan line, if you can see that. And I mean, it's a really easy seam to do. It's the same as a side seam, which I also did. And I really liked being able to knit it in pieces. The only challenge for me was the fitting, because I'd only knit raglans all in one before, and so I didn't have to worry about figuring out lengths or decrease sets. What I would do is if I noticed that the sleeves were getting smaller faster, I would just skip a few decreases on the sleeves while working on the body, or vice versa. So like I was kind of, I guess, modifying on the fly in a way that I couldn't with this sweater since I was doing each of the decrease lines separately. So it took me 3 tries on the body to get the decrease length to be what I wanted, because first I knit it too short, then I knit it too long, like I tried it on and it was going to be way down here, which I don't like it when the arm side is very long because then it looks sloppy. And so then I ripped back just a little bit, and that's how I settled on this length. If anything, I could have probably kept another 4 rows or so in. This is it's as snug as I would want my arm side to be. But luckily, since I can wear this with sleeveless tops, it's not that big of a deal. It's just something for me to remember in the future, is that apparently when trying it on, even this one, it seemed like it was going to be as low as this dress, at least. But then that's not how it turned out once I seamed it. So I guess if you're trying on a raglan in pieces, it doesn't fit the same way that trying on a set-in sleeve in pieces is going to fit. So what I ended up doing to figure out the length is I just held it up next to the linen sweater that I was wearing last episode, which is also a raglan, and kind of made sure it was around the same length, because I wasn't sure what I wanted this measurement to be, because I just haven't knit that many raglans, to be honest. So after that, I sorted that out on the body pieces, and then I went back and I had already knit one of the sleeves all the way to the top, but in addition to having done it with the wrong decrease rate, I had also managed to not quite center the seam. Like when I had bound off for the underarm, instead of centering this bottom part, I was like 1 motif over, which I knew was going to drive me nuts. So I went ahead and ripped that back to, where you start the sleeve cap. And then I had the second sleeve to that. And so this week, all I had to do was knit both those sleeve caps, which means I finally had to sit down and count these rows so that it would match. And that turned out to be really simple. And then seam those in and do the bands and all the end weaving in. But it wasn't too bad. So the other thing to talk about with the raglan is, of course, the decorative eyelets. I'm so pleased with how these turned out. Because I seamed it, I couldn't see how this line was going to look until I had actually sewn it up. Before then, each piece just had its own little wobbly one eyelet along the edge. And so I was incredibly thrilled to see how well that turned out, and I think it looks so good. Yeah, I really love it. So this was inspired by a pair of socks that I knit. It was actually the second pair of socks that I knit myself, and it was a Free Wendy Johnson pattern, and it had this really pretty double eyelet motif, and it's really one of my favorite motifs. And then I, of course, know that you can add decoration to a raglan line, and I had been wanting to try that. Sorry, still motorcycle season here, so hopefully that nonsense will be over soon. But so I'd always wanted to try it, and then this sweater seemed like a good place to try it because I knew that if I wanted the eyelets to make a triangle, I was going to end up with more and more stockinette on each side just because this is a 6-row motif. No, this is an 8-row motif, but obviously you're going in at a steeper rate here than you can for the raglan. So I thought that having those decorative eyelets would just kind of help draw the eye away from the extra stockinette there. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone but me. So yeah, I went for it, and I'm really pleased with how it turned out. I think the reason why actually this is a little snugger than the linen cardigan is because I think I made this sleeve more narrow at the top than I did for the linen cardigan. I think usually I leave about 8 stitches, and here I was down to 5 because I was down to 7, but of course then you seam and you lose 2 stitches. And so I guess I shouldn't have kept going, but I really love how this triangle forms, so I couldn't resist. And as I said, it's not so snug that it's uncomfortable when I wear it over a sleeveless top, so it'll still get a lot of use out of in my closet. What else to talk about? I decided on a 2x1 rib for the bands and the cuffs just because in all that swatching, seeing how good this yarn looked in stockinette and how it didn't look so great in knit purl combinations, I wanted a ribbing that looked smoother. And then I also wanted to be able to turn the cuffs back. And I really like the way the 1x2 rib looks as well. I think it looks really neat and smart. So that was a thought process there, and that's why I knit extra long cuffs is because Joel's house is near the lake, so obviously that's where I spend quite a bit of my time and where I'll eventually spend even more time. So even in the summer, once the evenings kick in, unless it's been really hot out, those lake breezes come and they're quite chilly. And so once night has fallen and we've got a fire pit or we're sitting out with friends or that kind of thing, it can be really nice to just have a little bit of wind blocking, in which case I wanted to have my sleeves nice and long, right, so my wrist didn't get cold. But then being able to turn them up means that they can be a little higher during the day. So that was why I went ahead and did those cuffs, and I really like how they turned out as well. And I think that's about it, except for the buttons. I'm sorry to everyone on Instagram who told me that I should sew on the gray buttons, and then I shamelessly ignored you all and went with the shell buttons anyway. The problem is that when you're taking a photo, anything that is pearlescent or light colored ends up looking even brighter. And so I completely understand why they seemed too bright in the photo. And I can even, I get that you would notice, they do draw attention to themselves, right? In a way that the gray buttons, which are very similar color to this blue, would not have drawn attention to themselves. However, since this felt like such a 1950s cardigan to me, shell buttons also feel very much of that era. And I felt that there were enough strong design elements in this. Like the eyelet pattern is so obviously there, and then these strong triangular lines that I felt they could hold their own with the brighter buttons. In the last sweater that I knit, I ended up switching to low contrast buttons because the brighter buttons made it so that you didn't notice the moss stitch and all that texture got lost. But that was a tweedy yarn, and the texture was a bit more subtle. And so I decided that I would start with the shell buttons, and then if I really didn't like them, I could always cut them off and do the gray buttons instead. But I actually really like this result, so I am unlikely to cut them off. See, here's that spare end. But I really do appreciate everyone for taking the time to share their opinion. I'm sorry that I didn't listen as well this time. The final thing about the button bands is, as I said, I knitted a little wider than usual, and that was just because I wanted the sweater to not be too small for me. And I also noticed, so I always knit button bands pretty snug because I find that otherwise you get that gaping, or at least you get the waviness in the buttonhole band. However, I forgot that cotton is not quite as elastic as wool, and so when I finished it, the ribbing wasn't stretching out to meet the neckline, and also it just looked like the button had been sewn on too high, and so rather than redo all of that, because sewing on buttons takes a while, and I would have had to redo the buttonhole band and all that, I just took my crochet hook and crocheted a row of single crochet along the top and bottom to even it up with the neckline edge and add just a little bit of extra frame for the buttons. And I think that that worked really well. It certainly looks better. Sorry. It's still, this is certainly as high as you would ever put a button. I probably should have put it a little lower, but I think with that extra crochet edging, that helps make it it helps make it acceptable. I know, I should be aiming for higher than acceptable, but it is what it is. I really like how it looks. I'm not going to be fussed by that issue. And as you can see, once I start to button it, that button band sits really nice and flat. And I'm sure that's because, in addition to picking up as few stitches as I can get away with, I pick up at a rate of 1 for 2. I also, in the buttonhole bands, instead of doing 1 decrease, I do 2 decreases. And so that really helps make sure that there's not any extra fabric, which is what is going to kind of wave in between the buttons, if you know what I'm talking about. And I tried a new thing this time that I think worked really well. I added 1 extra row to the buttonhole side. So it's not enough that you notice when it's open, but I think it helps the buttonhole side really line up with the body of the sweater, and it just gives it a little bit of extra help because it's being stretched. So I think I'm going to start doing that with future sweaters. Longtime viewers know that the pursuit of the perfect button band is just something that I'm always working on. Would that be? Yeah, because button bands are so tricky, and as someone who primarily wears and knits cardigans, they play a large part in my life, and so I feel like I learn something a little new every time, and I'm inching my way towards having button bands that work better and better. I didn't have to reknit these bands, so I'll take that as a win. And here is the way that I will probably wear it the most. I've got the waistband buttoned, but the rest of it is unbuttoned. And there's that raglan decrease. I'm really pleased with this sweater. I am so thrilled to have it in my wardrobe. This fabric feels incredible to wear, even though it is really warm out right now. And I will definitely be using this kind of yarn to knit future sweaters. So yeah, I don't know how much of what I talked about with that sweater is going to make it onto the sweaters project page. I have the eyelet pattern linked, but other than that, I'm just not sure because so much of it is kind of amorphous. But I will try to at least write down what I did for the button bands. And, oh, there was one other thing I wanted to talk about with the buttons. So, Actually, it's the buttonhole side. So normally, if I'm doing a buttonhole band in whatever pattern, anything other than 1x1 ribbing, I always make sure that the buttonholes fit in with the pattern. So I want all the buttonholes to be in purl troughs if it's a rib or something like that. I guess moss stitch, seed stitch, I don't have to worry about that so much either. But sometimes that can be really difficult. And in the case of this sweater, the math actually worked really evenly, but it would have required me to put 10 buttons on, and that just seemed too many. I felt like this is 9, and anything more than that, and it just would have looked button crazy. So rather than make sure that all the holes are in the same spot pattern-wise, I just divided them evenly so that they're all separated stitch count-wise and decided to not worry about it. And I think that when I'm wearing it, it looks just as good. I was really bothered by how it looked when I was knitting it, and I mean, I'm not a huge fan of how this looks, but once I'm wearing it and it's the whole sweater as a piece, I think it looks fine, and I think that that also is helping the button band sit really nicely, is that I prioritize the number of buttons over trying to fit it in the stitch count. So I'm not trying to smush too many buttons on or get away with too few. And so yes, that was the other lesson that I've learned from this button band, is that I don't need to be quite so precious about pattern matching. That is why I like to do things like 1x1 ribbing and seed stitch, though, is because then it's so much easier to space buttons without worrying about messing up your pattern. Enough sweater talk. On to my frog along progress. I was going to say process, wrong word. Progress. And I didn't do either the vest or the swan sweater this past week. Instead, I went ahead and darned some socks. So I have never darned socks before. But towards the end of last winter, several of my very favorite socks developed holes in them. And all the socks I'm going to show you use Quince & Company Finch yarn, which is one of my very favorite sock yarns, and it is 100% wool. It's not superwash and there's no nylon. So that might be why they sprung holes, but I feel it's probably because these are my favorite socks, and so I wear them more than the other socks. So, I mean, take that for what it's worth. I reviewed a while ago Quince Finch as a sock yarn, and I feel like it stands up really well. You'll see, because I'm going to show you the soles of the socks. There's really not much pilling or bobbling at all. And so I really think it was just because I wear these socks more frequently. And honestly, I would rather need to darn them in some cases, I think this is like a 3-year-old sock, 2 or 3 years. Anyway, I would rather have to darn them every once in a while and get the pleasure of wearing these socks than use a different yarn that is perhaps will never spring holes, but is also less comfortable for me to wear. So, okay, so that caveat aside, I sat down not knowing how to darn socks, and rather than look up a tutorial on the internet, I just decided to wing it. So I grabbed a little ball of yarn of a BFL nylon blend that I just had left over. I keep a little mason jar of tiny balls of yarn because I figured that would be sturdy. And I started with these socks. These are a pair of Hermione Everyday socks. This is Quince Finch and Petal, and the contrast is Quince Tern and Stonington, which I actually don't like as a sock yarn, and that is where the hole sprung. Anyway, so this was my first darning attempt. I posted photos of this on Instagram, and you can see I just did it kind of randomly, and this one was second. But pretty soon I had developed a process, and by the end, I feel like I was looking pretty neat. So what I did was I used the pink yarn on these socks and these socks, which also have the pink in the heel flap. You can see that apparently I wear out toes, not heels. And then I switched to a mohair yarn that I had left over because I thought the color matched better with these. And this one didn't have any issues, but this one, it didn't have a hole, but it was a weak spot. I could see the fabric was considering fraying, so I went ahead and did that too. So all in all, I darned 7 socks, and by the end, I had developed a process. I will tell you my process, although I have not worn these, so I can't tell you yet how it wears or even how it feels because I did this right before it warmed up. So what I ended up doing was, first I took the yarn, and if there was a real hole like this, I put my knitting needle in where those stitches were dropped, and then I knit up a little patch, and then I grafted it to the top of the stitches, and then I just kind of sewed it down the sides. I didn't do mattress stitching, which would have made for a neater result because I didn't want, when you match your seam, you end up with 2 stitches inside on the wrong side, and I didn't want that on my foot. So instead I was just kind of going under, which did not make for as neat a look, but I think it'll feel more comfortable. And I made sure that I was catching any spare yarn from the original sock. However, there were other cases where there wasn't a full hole yet. It was just that the yarn had been worn away and was looking a little weak, and you could tell that pretty soon those final plies were going to snap. So in those cases, what I did was I took the yarn and I did duplicate stitching. And I started 1 stitch over, basically, from wherever the problem area was, sometimes 2 stitches, depending. And then I just duplicate stitched all across. So once I had that base, either the new knit or the duplicate stitch, that was kind of the vertical base for me. And let me see if I can, you can see that on the inside there's way less yarn for that. And there you can see that it's a solid patch that I knit. Not sure if that's useful or not. But okay, so that was stage 1. And that was where the fabric was stabilized and everything was good, but I didn't want to leave it there just because I thought, hey, I might as well keep reinforcing. So then all I did was I started weaving horizontally. So I had columns of knit stitches, and I just used the V's as the weft, essentially. So I would do 1 horizontal pass where I was going through all the left sides of the V's, and then in the next one I would go through all the right sides. And I just did that across the patch until it was all covered. So that is my unvented darning process. I have no idea if that's typical darning or not. I really wish I had one of those darning eggs or mushrooms because it would have been way simpler than having to keep my hand in the socks. But the process still really didn't take that long. So I'm really glad that I did that. I feel more confident, and I'll be able to, whenever I notice any socks now are starting to get worn or anything, I'm going to go ahead and do some preventative darning so that I don't end up busting my toe through the sock, which is what happened to this pair. So, yeah, I'm very pleased with that, and I'm definitely getting my knits into shape for fall. Hopefully next week I'll be able to show you at least the Market Day vest sorted out with the new clasps. I had forgotten them at Joel's, which is part of why, and he brought them over, but at that point I was like, might as well work on socks anyway. Let's talk about works in progress. As you can imagine, with all those finished objects, I don't have a whole lot to show you. I haven't even cast on for the second of those striped Legwarmers that I showed in the last episode. I forgot when I was packing last weekend that I would need to bring a smaller needle in order to do the provisional cast on, so I couldn't cast on last weekend, and then I've just been busy with other things this week. So in addition to the stuff I showed you that I finished, the other thing that's been occupying my time is this lovely sock. I'm calling these my Do What Bunnies Do socks, which is after an Ingrid Michaelson song. I will link to it. It's called You and I. It's really sweet and upbeat and funny, and so these socks kind of are putting me in a very cheerful pop music kind of mood, and every time I work on this chart, that song just starts running through my head. I think it was really popular when I was in college, so that's why it got lodged there, but she also mentioned sweaters in that song. As knitters, we should all appreciate that. So this is a test knit for Kyla of Arctos Knits, who has just recently started publishing patterns, although she's been making up designs for herself for quite a while, and I love that her patterns all tend to be nature inspired. She has a degree in botany, biology with a focus on botany, something like that. And those beautiful leaf mitts that I showed last month in the pale pink mauve yarn, the leaves and then the thumb leaves, those were another test knit by her, and that pattern is now available. It's the hedge nettle mitts. I will include that link below. So these are going to be her second published pattern, and she called for test knitters, and I could not resist the adorable little bunnies with a little heart on them. And I'm so pleased that I'm able to test knit for this because I love this sock. So the gray color is Barocco Ultra Alpaca Fine in Moon Shadow. I had 48 grams left over from the spider socks that I knit myself last October. And the pattern calls for 50 grams of each, so I figured I'd be fine with that since they're pretty short. And the background color is Malabrigo Sock in Eggplant, which is an absolutely beautiful purple. I hope it's showing up as, it's so rich and gorgeous. And it was in the big box of yarn that I was so incredibly lucky to receive last year. So I've been kind of hoarding it since then. And this is actually the third yarn that I tried for the background for this. The first was the turquoise color of Ultra Alpaca Fine. And although I love those two colors together, there wasn't a high enough contrast for the bunnies to pop. Then I tried a navy blue, but for some reason the navy blue and gray, just that particular shade of navy blue and this particular shade of gray were not complementing each other. They just kind of flattened each other out and they looked vaguely sporty, and so I didn't like that. And so then I thought of this purple, and I'd been kind of hoarding it, but I decided that it only called for 50 grams, so I'd have 50 grams left over to knit a hat. And also because you do a contrast heel and toe, my other hesitation with using it for socks is that it's, mainly a merino yarn. But I figured that that would help it last, because I don't usually have much wear in the middle here. So I went ahead and opted for that, and I really love how it looks, so I'm glad that I did that. I'm actually glad that I had to knit the bunny chart several times. I think I got this far down with the turquoise, and I knit all of it down to here with the navy blue, and then finally did it with the purple, because there are some quite long floats in this chart, and with the navy blue I was getting little blips of gray there, so I think I was leaving my floats too loose. Or catching them too frequently or something, but there's no blip showing anymore, so I seem to have gotten that right. This is actually the first pair of colorwork socks that I'll have knit for myself instead of doing as a gift, so I'm really excited about that. And I'm doing the Eye of Partridge heel as called for in the pattern, and that's a slip stitch heel that I really like. And then it was really neat because in addition to doing this little blip of colorwork, the pattern includes an optional Eye of Partridge toe, and that was really neat because I just finished darning toes of all those socks, and I was thinking that maybe I needed to start knitting reinforced toes as well as heels, and there was Kyla telling me how to do it, so I went ahead and opted for that, and I really like how it feels. It's extra cushy, of course, because of the slip stitches, and I'm really curious to see how it will wear. So I've got the cuff knit on the second one, and I just need to start knitting some more bunnies. Can't wait to wear these. And I really like this shorter length for autumn when I'm wearing Oxfords or other flats. I find that if I knit them higher to wear with boots or just to be extra warm in the winter, they look a little too long with just regular flat shoes. So I like having a variety of sock lengths for different seasons. So that's the only thing on my needles right now. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have crunched ice. I'll edit that out. But I also knit up yet another swatch for this green sweater out of Quince & Company Finch in the Sage colorway. I have been talking about this sweater since January. Originally, it was going to be part of an owl project when I was still participating in the Harry Potter House Cup. then I kind of revived it a few months ago, and I knit this swatch to decide on what cable I wanted. These are from the Japanese stitch pattern book. And then I just keep not knitting it, which is really frustrating. Not frustrating, but like I want this sweater and I really want to knit it. And so the reason why I did another gauge swatch is just to make sure that my gauge hadn't changed, because the original stockinette swatch that I had was from back in January, and that was quite a while ago. So this is the original swatch. So yeah, so I have finally gotten this, and I couldn't remember what needle size I used, so I have finally gotten that sorted out, and I plan to cast on over the weekend. I'm going to have quite a bit of time to myself tomorrow, so I'm going to plot the sweater and begin knitting it. I'm really excited, and it's living in my Spinster's tote bag, which I won on my birthday. It's from Rose Witchery, and she was doing a giveaway. And I was so excited because I don't usually win giveaways, and I actually have this print in my kitchen. But yeah, it's like the perfect project bag. So that will be my Saturday afternoon, figuring out a little bit of sweater math. I know that I went into some details about how I was going to sort out the fronts on the last episode where I talked about this sweater, so maybe I'll just rewatch that episode and bring some graph paper with me. Okay. I think next up I will... So for the yarn review, it's been a while since I've done one because I was thinking that I've reviewed all the yarns that I've used. But I don't think I reviewed Elsebeth Lavoid Silky Wool, which I used to knit a cardigan last spring. Yeah, so it's a silk wool blend, as implied by its name. It's a sport weight yarn, and it comes in these really nice heathered colorways. I'm not sure how much the heathering is showing through because I know cameras tend to blow out pinks and reds. But, and I used it to knit this cabled cardigan. So for a fairly loosely spun yarn, I thought it had really nice stitch definition. You can really see those cables, and here's the back cables. So I like that aspect of it. Even the little ones, you know, you see them. And I think it's held up quite well. I will, like, here's under the arms, which aren't pilling much at all, and I knit this at like a fairly drapey gauge. Obviously not the cable part, but the stockinette part at the sides is fairly drapey. I would not use this yarn again though for a sweater because I find it's right on the edge of too itchy for me. I had gotten this when it was on a really good sale at my former local yarn store in Texas because I'm always on the quest for sweaters I can wear in warmer weather just so that I can extend my sweater wearing season, and I tend to run warm, so I'm not one of those people who can just wear wool sweaters all the time. I wish. But, so I thought, oh, it's 50% silk, that should help, and in the skein it didn't feel itchy, but I have learned since that I just can't trust how yarn feels in the skein. And so, unfortunately, even though I can wear this, I have to wait until the weather's cooler because otherwise the yarn itches me. And so I don't get a lot of, like, I was envisioning this as a transitional sweater, and then I just don't get that kind of wear out of it because of the yarn. And in addition, and I should have known this just because of the silk content, but the waistband definitely does not like to, like, it was knit in ribbing, but as you can see, it just sits flat. Like, it doesn't gather in the way that ribbing usually gathers in at all. And since I like to wear crop sweaters that are snug around the waist, then that is a major downside for me. I also think it's grown a little lengthwise. Either that or I might have just knit it too long, but now it's hitting just maybe an inch longer than I normally like my sweaters to hit, and I don't think I knit this too long. I don't remember having that issue when I first started wearing it. So I think it's grown lengthwise as well. So I would not, for me, this was not a great sweater yarn, but it does look nice in the cables, and if you don't share my sensitivities to wool, then it certainly makes a lightweight fabric with a lot of drape, and you're not going to feel super hot in the yarn, which is really nice. I think it really just comes down to what you need from a sweater yarn, and for my criteria, the silky wool is not great, but as I showed you, it's held up pretty well. I do wear this. It's not like, I would say I probably wear it twice a month in the winter, so it's not getting nearly as much wear as my quince sweaters. Sorry, my laundry is dry, but it's gotten enough wear that I think it's safe to say that the yarn holds up well, essentially. But yeah, so that is my lukewarm review of Elsebeth Lavoid Silky Wool. I'll just stick with Turn which is a Quince & Company silk wool blend, for any other sweaters that I want to knit in that style. And also heathered from the silk. I don't know why I'm buttoning this right now. It makes me feel bad when I do not super glowing reviews of yarn. I think that's the other reason why. I mean, when I say I've reviewed all the yarns I've used, what I mean is I've reviewed all my favorite yarns that I've used. So, I don't know. I'm not sure where the ethics are there. But on the other hand, if I don't tell you about what doesn't work for me, then that's harder to judge when I do tell you what works for me. And it's not that I think it's a bad yarn, it's just not the right yarn for me for a sweater. I do have another skein of this in gray in my stash that I bought when I bought this, because there were only 5 skeins left of this color, and so I thought, oh, well, if necessary, I'll just do a contrast. So I can see myself using that in a hat. I wouldn't use it in mitts, because this yarn is just rough for me. But maybe a hat or something like that. So it's not a bad yarn, it's just not a yarn that I would buy another sweater's quantity in. Finally, the Schrodinger sweater segment, which is about a cowl this time. And it's yet more blue, so finishing my forget-me-not cardigan and putting it on has made me think about how much I love that shade of blue. And it reminded me that I've had this yarn in my stash. I think I got it not last Christmas, but 2 Christmases ago. So I really need to knit with it already. And this is a quince yarn. This is Phoebe, which is 100% extra fine American merino, and it's 301 yards to 100 grams. And it's unusual for their yarn, first in being a merino, and secondly because it is kettle dyed or tonally dyed, whereas most of theirs are solids. You can see that variation. And this is the Mercury colorway, and I love it so much. It really is so incredibly soft and smushy, and it's just one of my very favorite shades of blue. So I've got 2 skeins, so I've got 600 yards of it, and I want to make it into a cowl. That's why I'm wearing it around my neck. And what I'm thinking is, it's such like a plump yarn that I feel like a texture stitch would really show it off. And I've been looking at a few patterns. First of all, I looked at Purl Soho patterns because they have a lot of really nice stuff with texture. For me, the issue is when I knit a cowl, usually I like to be able to wrap it twice. Sorry, my nose. Sometimes it just gets itchy when I'm showing wool. So it needs to be a reversible texture. So I was thinking about doing something simple like the Purl Soho Mistake Rib Scarf, but as a cowl. Or just doing like seed stitch, moss stitch, something like that. Or there's the dovetail cowl pattern, which is a reversible texture, and when it's laid out, it's so neat looking. It's absolutely beautiful. It's got these like wavy diamonds, and they must be garter stitch based since it's reversible. But I'm not sure, once I've got it wrapped twice around me, whether having that pattern, whether it will still show up when I've wrapped it twice or whether I should just stick with something simpler. I really like the look of the Gaptastic Cowl, which is a free pattern, but that one's knit in bulky. And I guess I could hold this double and do a really bulky seed stitch type cowl, or I could just hold it singly and do a bigger seed stitch cowl and then wrap it more frequently. The other thing I was thinking about, other than texture, is a Hilary Smith Callis pattern. She's the one that does the cowls that are almost like a shawl cowl hybrid. So I wouldn't be able to loop it multiple times, but it would sit really nicely with the one loop. And I was specifically looking at the Aurelia cowl, which is a DK weight cowl, and it uses the feather and fan motif, which is so pretty anyway, and, you know, with the blue yarn, would kind of look like ocean waves. So that was my other thought, but that's more of a lace pattern, and I just think that, this would look so nice in texture. So, do you have any favorite textured cowls that wrap twice and either, I guess they don't have to be identical on both sides, but they have to look good on both sides? Any suggestions for me, or should I just, thoughts on whether I should hold it single or double? I don't know. I just know that I love this yarn. And 600 yards is definitely enough for me to do a cowl. If I hold it singly, it'll probably also be enough for me to do a matching pair of mitts or something. But I'm fine using it all up in the cowl instead, if that's what I want. I also thought about just making up my own kind of Guernsey style cowl, but only with the texture stitches that are reversible, so just spending some time with Barbara Walker books and doing it that way. I don't know. I'd love to hear what you think, and yeah. So even though it's 84 degrees outside and I've got this wrapped around my neck, it is nothing but squishy softness. So this is incredibly soft yarn. I think even my super wool sensitive mother would be able to wear this next to her skin. I'll bring the cowl home with me over my trip in Christmas and see what she thinks of it. But yeah, I want to cast this on pretty soon. So ideas, please. A lot of times for this segment I do kind of general stuff, but I definitely want to get this knit because I wear cowls a lot in the cooler months. And it would be nice to have a blue one. Okay, just for old time's sake, I have now spent a good few minutes luring Moth out of her closet nap with treats and playtime so that she can be in front of the camera looking awkward. And I have grabbed Thistle. Oh, I know, Moth, no dignity. She's still here. I have grabbed Thistle for you guys as well. So here she is, looking very put out because Moth got the last treat. Don't worry, they got equal amounts of treats. Thistle just feels that her fair share is 100%. And that is my episode for today. I hope that you enjoyed it and that your own knitting and crafting has been going well. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye!